We've recently gone over all of the Dark Angels, Relics, Warlord Traits and new abilities from Ritual of the Damned, but today we're going to go and reassess how the Relics and Warlord Traits from the Codex fit into our current game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the table. Today we'll be looking at the Relics and the Warlord Traits of the Dark Angels. We'll go through each individual one from the Codex and have a brief discussion about how good it is in comparison with the others and our new options from Ritual of the Damned. Without further ado, let's jump into it. Let's go for Warlord Traits first then, and the Dark Angels have 6 from the main book. First up we have Fury of the Lion. If your Warlord charged, was charged or performed a heroic intervention this turn, then for any Dark Angels units within 6 inches of them, add 1 to their strength characteristic in the fight phase. Not a bad melee buff with this, and it's fairly easy to trigger, provided your Warlord is getting into melee with at least 1 enemy unit. It is a little bit clunky trying to coordinate combat aura buffs like this, because you might fail your charge with either the Warlord or the unit that he's supporting, or either the Warlord or the unit that they're supporting might get shot and killed. I'd say at the very least that this one will actually give a +1 strength to your Warlord himself, which is particularly good if you're using a souped up weapon such as a Power Fist or Thunderhammer, allowing you to wound things like knights or vehicles on 3s. A bit of a downside is having to actually throw your Warlord into close combat, which is rarely the best thing, unless the buff is incredibly good. But I guess this could be a solid buy-in with Hero of the Chapter if you're trying to build a Smash Master from Dark Angels. Chaplain Asmodai has this one, if you make him your Warlord by the way. Next we have Courage of the First Legion, which causes friendly Dark Angels to automatically pass morale tests while they're within 12 inches of your Warlord. In most other armies this would be phenomenally helpful, but in Dark Angels it's somewhat less so. Everyone has Grim Resolve, which means that at most you're only losing 1 casualty from morale per turn, and quite a good number of the units have Inner Circle and are therefore fearless. I'd probably have to pass this one up, as even in the best case scenario it's barely going to save you any casualties to morale. Ezekiel has this one, and it's a good reason not to make him your Warlord. Next up we have Brilliant Strategist, which is a way of farming command points. Each time you use a stratagem on a 5+ you gain 1 command point back. Since the tactical restraint matched play rules came into effect, you can only regain 1 per battle round, but still this probably will add up to a good 2 or 3 over the course of the game. More command points mean more fun extra abilities with stratagems, so this one's a good pick if you're unsure, particularly if you have a reasonable amount of command points available, so you are likely to gain a reasonable amount back. In addition to this, you can also, once per battle, reroll a single hit roll, wounds roll, damage roll or saving throw, and that can be any of your Dark Angels models on the table. It doesn't have to be your Warlord, so that will save you a command point reroll at some point in the game. I find that saving throws for key characters are quite a decent shout for this, or perhaps rerolling a 1 on a damage roll to try and fish for more. Overall, a very solid trait. Azrael and our new upgraded Master Lazarus have this one, and it certainly makes them a little bit more tempting to run as your Warlord. Next up we have Huntsman. This one allows your Warlord to fire their pistol, assault, rapid fire and grenade weapons at enemy characters, even if they aren't the closest. Somewhat limited on characters, as they tend to be a bit locked out of taking very heavy weaponry. Could potentially be useful on something like a combi plasma. Really it is going to be most useful on things with long range, such as that. If you were really going all in on sniping characters, you could even maybe combine it with Mastercrafted Weapon to up the damage on it, but I'm not sure if that's really worth all of the Warlord Trait, Relic and command point investments. In addition to this, it also lets you pile in or heroically intervene towards enemy characters rather than the closest enemy model. Potentially somewhat useful, though I suspect the applications of this are quite a lot more niche. Overall, not my favourite trait to be honest. I think we can do better. Master Belial has this, and it's quite a good reason not to make him your Warlord to be honest. There are a few characters that are going to be troubled by his Stormbolter. Next up we have a much better one, Master of Maneuver. This one allows you to re-roll the dice to determine how far friendly Dark Angels advance and charge when they're within 6 inches of your Warlord. Flat re-roll charges is always great to pick up. It's good for making charges with Black Knights. It's good for charging out of Deep Strike with Terminators, particularly when combined with a Chaplain's +2 inch to charge range for example. And it could even help out your units advancing in a pinch. Overall a very strong trait to combine with either the Raven or Deathwing. Samael also has this whether he's on Corvex or Sableclaw. Finally we have Stubborn Tenacity. This one's a defensive buff, and you roll a dice each time your Warlord loses a wound, adding 1 to the result if he didn't move during his last movement phase. On a 6+, your Warlord does not lose that wound, so basically a 6-up feel no pain type save that's a little bit better if your Warlord doesn't move. For the most part, moving is quite important to characters, even if they're just backline gunline characters, and being able to optionally position to best help out your gunline is generally quite important. It's not the worst in the world, but I'd far rather have one of the others. Overall from this list, my favourites are Brilliant Strategist for the command points and Master of Manoeuvre for the reroll charge rolls. Both provide excellent value and can really help out other units in your list. They do have some stiff competition from the Deathwing and Ravenwing Warlord traits now. If you're running Talon Masters or other Ravenwing units, Impeccable Mobility is an incredibly good one, as is Outrider to scout up some Black Knights or something to close to the enemy. On the Deathwing side, Lay Low the Mighty is pretty powerful, and for me it generally beats out Fury of the Lion if you're looking to buff a fighty character. It's good to have options though. It will depend on exactly what units you're running, as to which one you feel is the best value. Moving on, we'll look at the relics from the Codex Dark Angels, and I'm not going to lie, these are a little bit underwhelming compared with the relics of some other codexes, which has the exact same profile as a Stormbolter, except it's AP -1 and flat damage 2. It's not a terrible damage buff if you're getting to fire it all game long, but it's very unlikely to be game changing, and certainly doesn't tend to affect your characters quite as much as buffing their close combat. Talking of buffing close combat, we next have the Heavenfall Blade. This one's a relic power sword with strength +2, AP -3 and damage D3, and furthermore you get 1 additional attack with the weapon when it fights. This one's considerably better, at least in my opinion. It makes the character a really good blender going through elite infantry. It is a bit of a trade-off with a power fist however, which is pretty cheap to put on your characters at only 5 points more than a power weapon. The Heavenfall Blade will generally do better against pretty much most infantry, where the Power Fist will serve you better if you're fighting Toughness 7 vehicles. In particular, the Heavenfall Blade can be quite useful to put on a Talon Master to soup up its close combat ability, because Talon Masters can't take Power Fists, meaning the relic is a lot more tempting. So I certainly think it's potentially useful. It does compete a bit with Monster Slayer of Caliban, which is from the Vigilist detachment and has the exact same profile, except you add 1 to wound rolls for targets that target an enemy monster or vehicle instead of the extra attack, making it basically at least equal to a Power Fist if not better in all scenarios. Out of the two, I probably prefer the Monster Slayer of Caliban in general, although they're both fairly well balanced. Next we have Lion's Roar, which is in strong contention for one of the worst relics in the game. This one replaces a Combi Plasma and sort of side grades it rather than upgrades it. Basically the Plasma Blaster profile is 18-inch range rather than 24-inch range that the Combi Plasma would have, but it's Assault 2 instead, meaning that it'll be better at shooting targets that are in 18-inch range than your standard Combi Plasma, but the same against targets within 12 and worse at targets within 24 as it'll be out of range. Furthermore, Combi Plasmas are sort of questionable to put on your characters anyway, as even with reroll ones you're rarely going to want to overcharge them, as you do still have a pretty reasonable chance of sniping your own character dead by his own plasma gun exploding. This is one to safely leave at home at the moment, I'm afraid. Next up we have the Mace of Redemption. This one is a massively souped up power maul. It gives strength +3, AP -3 and damage D3. And furthermore you can reroll any failed wound rolls made for this weapon against Heretic Astartes. Now the Power Maul is a pretty specific piece of kit, not available on every single character, and to be honest this one isn't really any better than the Heavenfall Blade. Its only advantage is +1 strength and the Heretic Astartes rerolls, which are very niche and army specific, where the Heavenfall Blade gets the additional attack, which will make it better against the vast majority of targets, so it's kind of outcompeted by the Blade and possibly the Monster Slayer of Caliban as well. Next we have the Shroud of Heroes. This one's a bit more of a useful damage prevention buff, in that your opponent must subtract -1 from all hit rolls targeting the bearer. This one could be reasonable if you're worried about a certain character getting sniped pre-game, and you want to put the relic on to try and confound at least some sniper fire. Besides that though, again it's not really the strongest relic ever. For the most part I prefer to buff my character's damage output unless you can make them truly ridiculously survivable with multiple stacking traits. Finally, we have the Eye of the Unseen, which is a You Fight Last type of power. This one is a 3-inch aura that firstly subtracts the leadership by 1 from any enemy units within 3 inches of the character, and secondly, all enemy characters within 3 inches can't be chosen to fight until the end of the fight phase, even if they've charged or have an ability that would allow them to fight first. This can be a bit of a surprise for a counter-attacking character, and it genuinely can make the difference between dealing out a whole load of damage from one of your enemy characters, or being killed first by your own characters. Could be kind of useful if you have it on a support character next to one of your own fighty characters, though the ability being limited to only being used on enemy characters is somewhat prohibitive. I do think it's rare that this one will actually make the biggest difference. So I'm afraid to say that the Relics section isn't overly impressive from our Dark Angels Codex, but Ritual of the Damned has gone a long way to correct this. Corvus Oculus for a Talon Master is particularly good. Plus 6-inch range and plus 1 to hit is a meaningful increase in damage and capability for your Talon Masters, and is a strong pick indeed. Mastercrafted Weapon is a one that's hard to go wrong with, whether you're souping up a Power Fist to have a whole ton of damage, or making a Thunderhammer damage 4. In terms of buffing relics, Angels Ambit can increase the aura ranges of the model by 3, which is very useful. So if I were you, I'd generally pick the relics from either Ritual of the Damned or from the Vigilus formation over most of the Codex relics, if you are trying to optimise your list a little. We'll be continuing with our look at the Dark Angels over the next few weeks. Hopefully we'll have a video on the standard Deathwing Terminator squad out next, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see that. If you'd like to support the channel, there's a Patreon link in the video description down below. It would certainly be nice to concentrate on this more as a full-time thing, rather than just as a side project, so if you've been enjoying the content from the channel, any support is much appreciated. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.